Welcome to Life and Love in the Q, a podcast for the LGBTQIA2S plus community, those who support them, and those who just want to learn more.
Together we share the stories and the science of the space and grace to live life in full color.
I'm Jillian Abbey, proud lesbian and mother, Hay House author, queer blogger, and TikTok something or other.
And I'm Treisha Peterson. I'm an LGBTQ ally, proud mom of 6, professor and researcher of identity and the social narratives that impact the way we live and love.
So open your mind, open your heart, and welcome to Life and Love in the Q.
Welcome back, Jill. How are you today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Ooh, I like the song. I'm doing great, but I can't wait to have this chat.
About trauma.
About trauma.
We have to start with show tunes when we're talking about heavy topics.
Yes. I will say I don't think that we're going to get into any conversation that's going to really have a lot of trigger warning to it. And I am also going to say that I think this is a really important conversation. So if our listeners heard the word trauma and decided I've got to tap out, I want them to try to tap back in if they can, because this is a really important conversation, especially around families who are navigating maybe the transition of the LGBTQ experience from one way of living to accepting and loving unconditionally in this new paradigm. So, but before we get started, I kind of want to go back to something we started talking about last week, which is microaggressions, because we started talking and then I really stumbled over the definition and stumbled to even give examples of what a microaggression is. So I want to give the formal definition, which is microaggression is a term used for commonplace, daily, verbal, behavioral, or environmental slights, whether intentional or unintentional, which we did talk about, that communicate a hostile, derogatory, or negative attitudes towards stigmatized or culturally marginalized groups. So I think that that's one of the things that's really important to recognize is I do believe that there can be microaggressions in many different ways, but it's really focusing on those culturally stigmatized and marginalized groups that need to have the conversation. And one of the reasons that, well, first of all, do you have any thoughts on that new definition?
No, I love it. And I think in our roundabout way, we kind of got there on a lot of the points. And then it also just reminded me, because it is a slight, it is a microaggression. They're exhausting.
Very
because
exhausting.
The frequency tends to be greater, I feel like. And it almost makes you hyper vigilant. Like we're going into Pride Month now, and which is a time to celebrate the LGBTQ community. And at the same time, I'm kind of bracing myself for the amount of microaggressions that always come out every time people are feeling overwhelmed with rainbows. So anyhow.
Well, I even have stuff to say about that. But the reason, so the microaggressions is actually one of the reasons that I really wanted to have this conversation. And I'm going to use a couple of examples that are pretty specific to the LDS world, to the Mormon world, because I have several different families, whether they're clients or just friends of mine, who have reached out and asked me some of these questions. But I really do think that it shows up in a lot of different ways. I just want to use some very real life experiences. So I'm going to kind of frame it within that Mormon world. But the reason that this is such an important thing to talk about is anytime that you have a belief system or a value system that you've been aligned with, or you've been living your life really focused on kind of that foundation of the way that you operate in your life. And then something comes in maybe and shakes that up so that it happens when we're talking about any kind of life transition. You get a divorce, you move, you change jobs, you're unemployed, like anytime your life has some sort of a transition, then there's always this layer of uncertainty. Like, now what do we do? How do we interact? What do we believe? And the less that we actually sit down and resolve some of that uncertainty, then the more we leave this element of potential shame and potential masking, like a potential feeling very self-conscious even in environments where you should feel safe. And it's where these microaggressions become super common. So one of the examples I want to share that I know this is a really big one in the LDS world is you're supposed to go to church every single Sunday in our church. And we've talked about that the youth even have early morning scripture study classes that they go to before they go to high school. They're supposed to go to church every Sunday, and then they're supposed to go to youth activities every Wednesday night. And then about once every 3 months, they have weekend youth activities that they're supposed to go to. So there's a lot of church activities that you're supposed to engage in. And then all of a sudden, let's say you have a child, and the child decides that they don't want to go to church anymore, or they decide that they want to wear a tank top to church, or they decide whatever it is. But all of a sudden, you have a person in the family who wants to do things different than the norm. And so every Saturday for the first couple of months, parent walks in and says, don't forget, church is at 8 a.m. tomorrow. And child says, I'm not going to church tomorrow. We talked about this last week. Yes, you are going to church. Our family goes to church every Sunday together. We talked about this. I don't want to go to church. I don't feel comfortable. So there's this argument that ensues every Saturday night. And at first, it's kind of an annoyance, right? Like, dad's coming into the room again, and he's going to talk to me about going to church. So I kind of start avoiding my dad if I'm a child. And then pretty soon, it becomes such a habit, this argument, that then now on Friday, child doesn't even want to see dad or doesn't want to see mom. And then pretty soon, if the argument continues and there's no decision made between the two parents and the child, okay, we're going to take a 6-month break from church. You don't have to go for 6 months. Then can we recheck? Like, can we reassess how you're feeling about church? Can we learn a little bit more about why you don't want to go to church? Instead of trying to convince you that you're wrong. So going back to what we talked about last time, you've got to see, you've got to hear, and you've got to believe. If you have a child telling you that they don't feel comfortable at church, there's a reason. And don't try to convince them that there's not a reason, but truly listen. Why do they not feel comfortable at church? But so then what happens is slowly over time, you have these things. So Sunday morning rolls around and dad yells up, child, come to church. That's a microaggression. Comes into the bedroom. Why aren't you ready for church? Another microaggression. Does that kind of make sense what I'm saying? And the more it happens, then over time now you've got parent 2, maybe the wife, the partner, is also feeling kind of walking on eggshells because they just want to quit the fighting every Saturday. And then the other kids start worrying, well, why is she not going to church? Why can't I have? And then it's like this trickle. We've talked about that trickle. So you've all of a sudden got this trickle going down that originally it was one child doesn't feel comfortable going to church. Child and parent argue, parent and parent argue, child, parent argue. And now you've like created this layer of uncertainty. What do we do about going to church? Whereas many families can create such a level of peace if they just sit down and say, how do we want to handle this? There's a belief system that has now changed here. Do we want to support this child? Do we want to keep fighting this child? Do we want to force this child? And again, we see it with LGBTQ kids and their parents all the time. You might have a child who has been very visibly male for most of their life, and now is maybe experimenting more on that non-binary side and wants to paint their nails and pierce their ears and maybe wear a little bit more effeminate clothing. And you have a parent who is saying, you can't wear that in public. No child of mine is going to dress like that as we go to the restaurant. And so you have these things that get said. And unless there's a conversation that says, oh, we need to break some belief systems down, then we create this uncertainty loop. That the uncertainty loop is this question mark of what it means for me to be able to belong, a level of shame because I don't know if I still am safe to belong in this environment. And now what is the new belief? And if you never resolve that loop, you maintain this level of trauma. And it might not be, a huge cataclysmic trauma like a car crash or a death in the family, but it's like this it's called daily hassle, but it's like this daily hassle that just constantly, I think you said last week, it's death by 1,000 paper cuts. It's like this slow, just eats away at the family, and it can eat away at the entire family if it's not resolved.
When you said we were talking about uncertainty trauma today, I thought I have no idea what that is. And two, I don't feel like that's the trauma that I've experienced. And yet now the way you're describing it, I think this is exactly the trauma I experienced coming out. I didn't have physical violence. I didn't have verbal. I mean, people, depending on their situation, who they're surrounded with, can have very different traumatic coming out experiences. But for me, one of the biggest challenges was my relationship with my mom.
Yeah.
And I knew she struggled with my coming out. And I knew that we both wanted to maintain a relationship. But for so long, every time we had a conversation, neither of us knew where that conversation would go and what direction it would take. And just that alone, picking up the phone and knowing that I could feel like total garbage at the end of this conversation created this constant tension and stress and worry about, okay, we had a conversation and today was good, but what about next time? Because again, things were not getting resolved. We weren't saying the hard things and the true things and the real things that needed to be said. And there was a lot of microaggressions thrown in, in the conversation to prove points and to, prove correctness. But really, I think that's one of the biggest things that chipped away at me over time was the uncertainty and not feeling safety in the conversation.
That the certainty breeds the safety. One of the things that I tell my clients all the time is you don't have to resolve anything, but you have to agree to let the situation rest, whatever it is, and set a time when we will come back and resolve it. So, we can't solve all of the world's problems. And again, coming from the LDS perspective, you can't disentangle an entire 10 generations of beliefs in one conversation. But you can sit down and say, okay, for the next 3 months, we're not going to put any pressure on you to go to church. We're not going to put any pressure on you to go to the activities. We're not going to, this conversation is done. We respect you. We respect your beliefs. We respect your journey. But can we talk about this again in the next 3 months or in 3 months and maybe help me understand some of the other experiences that you're having so that I can be a safe person for you. And in that time, child might have some things that she knows she's going to self-reflect on or they're going to self-reflect on. And parents are doing the same. Parents are really looking at their privilege. Parents are looking at where their belief systems might be creating unhealthy patterns for their family. Parents are doing some serious self-reflection to figure out, is this the best thing for my child or not? One of the other things that I tell my clients all the time is if there's one child who is trying to make their way out of a belief system, then there are children in the family who will have that secondary trauma. So you are going to have some kids who are going to automatically want to hurry and be perfect at everything. And then you have another child who will inevitably be mad at the child who is disrupting the status quo. And so if the parents don't understand what this uncertainty does to the entire family as a system, that's what I mean. It can derail the entire family system very quickly. And it's not, so many people think it's because their beliefs changed or they lost faith or they became wicked or whatever story you want to tell, but it's not that. It's the uncertainty that creates the trauma. It's the uncertainty that creates the distress. Again, that certainty breeds safety. So in an uncertain environment, you breed a sense of unsafety, which is distress.
I feel like if I'm understanding what you're saying correctly, though, like this almost takes a higher, I don't want to say a higher level or a more evolved level of parenting, but I know there's a lot of parents who maybe were raised in an authoritarian way where I'm the parent and this is what I say and that's what goes. And now you're saying in this situation that you said when speaking to the child, like, I hear what you're saying. I respect that this is what you want to try. And also, here's my side of it. But some parents really struggle with, it feels like, oh, well, I'm giving over control to the child in this situation. And again, I think it also goes back to like the authoritarian style of parenting is a very short-term solution driven. This is what I want, and you need to do it now. Whereas what you're saying is that in the long run, it's going to create a lot more problems. And so really being able to have these conversations with the kids and say, okay, I hear what you're saying. I maybe don't agree with it, but here are these parameters that we can agree to and can we come back to this in X amount of time, really is the more long-term healthy approach to resolving situations.
Yeah, and one of the ways that I explain this that I feel like always helps people the most is, first of all, you've got to keep in mind that anytime you have this chronic uncertainty and these little teeny microaggressions, and just by the way, that phrase that you just used is not just a microaggression, but it's actually considered verbal abuse. The phrase that says, "This is my house and we'll do things this way." Just that phrase being spewed in a home is cause to pull a child out of a home.
Wow.
Yeah. So that is considered verbal abuse enough that if a child says that in a therapy session, a therapist has to report that to child services.
My child of the 80s brain is struggling to
honestly,
really.
When I learned some of the phrases that are now considered verbal abuse and cause for child services to get involved, my brain burst because they were some that had been used in our family, not just my family of upbringing, but words that were just naturally used because it's what spewed from my mouth and from my ex-husband's mouth.
Yeah. No, they were just common phrases or things you'd hear on TV. And yeah, wow.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah, I could go totally into a couple of the really popular TV shows right now that are actually, if they were happening in real life, that child would be pulled out of the home.
Mm.
Anyway, so if you're in a situation where there's these constant microaggressions and this constant uncertainty, then first of all, every conversation you go into, two people have already put their walls up. So the conversations are already going to have conflict. Anytime you have your walls up, you have your defenses up, then you can't see eye to eye. You're really in that place where you're defending yourself so much that you can't actually find that common ground humanity. Anytime you're in conflict, automatically your heart is held hostage by your ego. Every time, without fail. So the way I explain this to people is when you are in a hostage situation, the FBI, the SWAT teams, the police departments, whoever it is that's involved in trying to stabilize the hostage situation, they always call in a hostage negotiator. And that negotiator's job is not to get the person who is holding people hostage, the person who has the gun or the bomb. It's not to get them to confess. It's not to get them to come out of the building. It's not to get them to put the weapons down. Their job is to get curious with the person who is holding people hostage. And if they can get curious enough and open up a dialogue, the person who's holding people hostage will reveal things that will allow the SWAT team and the FBI to come in safely and get everybody out of the building, stabilize the situation. So I tell my clients all the time, your number one job is to get curious with your kid. You're not solving a problem. You're not trying to convince them that they're wrong, and you're not trying to convince them that you're right. You're not trying to get them to see your point of view. Your job is to get curious. That's it. And then with that curiosity, everybody can go their separate ways and explore that curiosity. Why does my child not feel safe at church? Why? What do I see when my child is at church? How do I see that they're talked to by other people? How do I see that they feel like they might fit in or they don't? That's why I tell people, give yourself a span of time where there's no conversation about going to church, about the tank top, about the painted nails. And we're just exploring curiosity. And then if you can do that and come back, you're coming from a place of now we can create. Now we've been curious. Now we know what we're working with a little bit. How can we create something that feels safe for you and safe for me as a parent? Because the parent needs a little bit of safety too. If we're going to rock a system up, everybody needs to feel a level of safety.
Yeah. So, question for you, just to clarify, when you're talking about exploring this curiosity of why does my child not want to go to church, are these actual conversations that parents are having with the child? Or is it kind of, when we talked in our last episode about privilege, it was doing your own self-work to identify your privilege and then also hearing stories or meeting other people to learn what it meant to them and those differences?
I personally, the more rigid the belief system, the more curiosity that needs to be explored independently. Does that kind of make sense? So in the LDS church, there's a good chance that by the time a child has said that they don't want to go to church anymore, that they've already dropped hints that they don't feel comfortable. They don't want to go to seminary. They don't want to go to youth night. Why do they have to wear clothes like that? Why can't they just wear a tank top? Like, chances are there's already been a lot of pre-conversations that were like testing the water.
Yeah.
And which means there's probably been a lot of microaggressions. So the more of those kind of little mini arguments that have been had over the years, the more time that you need to explore that curiosity independently and then come back together. But the higher those walls are, the more uncertainty there is, the more trauma there is, then the more space that needs to be given to explore, wait, how do we create a place of belonging? And one of the things that's probably the hardest pill for me to swallow right now in my own personal life is I feel like this is actually the straw that broke our families back. When people ask me, well, why did you get a divorce? What happened? The biggest explanation I can say is that we did not have the communication skills and the tools to reconfigure our family in time. There was so much of this little uncertainty trauma that just trickled through our home over a certain amount of years that it was the inability to make new decisions that was really kind of the thorn that eventually just caused the bleed or created the bleed.
Yeah. Follow-up question to that, because I'm thinking about in my own situations, if the people that I was having this kind of uncertainty trauma with, if they were to go to their corner and I went to mine and we were both to explore these curiosities, we also approach things based on our own lived experiences and what we know. And so I'm curious, so say, for example, hey, parent, I'm gay. And they're like, don't be. And I'm like, well, it's, too late. I already bought the rainbow and pronoun pin. I can't go back. So they go to their space and they're trying to get curious about, okay, well, why now? Why is she coming out? Why does she feel this way? And the stories that they've been told or the narratives they've been surrounded with are, well, it's a midlife crisis. She's approaching 40 years old. She's bored in her marriage. She's looking to shake things up. She read Untamed. She's on lesbian TikTok. That's why. And so what if in their curiosity, they're pulling the wrong stories, I guess? I don't know, like coming to conclusions that aren't the experience of the child or the family member.
So I think you're bringing up a beautiful point because you're coming at it from the fact that one person is going to solve the other person's problem.
Yeah.
Jill is gay, Jill's a lesbian, and so she has a problem. Now I'm going to go and get curious because I'm going to figure out a way to convince her that she has a problem and I have the solution. That's not it. Uncertainty is, okay, I have a child who is explaining to me that they very, very definitely have attraction to members of the same sex. And every time, I'm going to frame this within my little world of the LDS. So every time they go to church, they feel incredibly threatened because their youth leaders know that they're identifying as gay. And so every single Sunday, there is some little microaggression. And this happens. There's a microaggression that talks about God hates gay people. Marriage is only sanctified between a man and a woman. So every single week, that child has to hear these teeny little microaggression cuts. So they come and they say, I don't want to go anymore. The job of the parent is not to go to the church leaders and say, stop it, not to go to the bishop and say, help us. The job of the parents is to say, why would that feel uncomfortable to my child? I believe my child. I hear what they're saying. I see them leave church every single Sunday in tears. I hear them, I see them, I believe them. Now, how would I feel? Where's my privilege? How would I feel if every single Sunday I went to church and I had to hear how bad I was, how wrong I was, how little God loved me, how much I had to fix before I was acceptable and belonged in this community? So I've not belonged before. I've not felt safe before. And I have very, very definitely felt like I could never measure up. So I don't understand, child, how you're feeling in the world of exploring LGBTQ, but I do know what it feels like to not belong. And I can't put you in an environment like that anymore. As a matter of fact, I think I'd like to stay home with you. Do you want to explore a different church?
Should we go to Pride together?
Should we? Yeah. So that,
okay, maybe too far, but yeah.
But do you know what I mean?
Yeah. It's empathy. It's just being able to say, okay, so this is what I want, but maybe I see and believe that they don't want that. Why would that be? And how can I connect the dots between what they're feeling and maybe when I've experienced that same feeling before for something else? And how would I have wanted to be treated, or what kind of space would I have needed, or what kind of safety would I have needed in that situation?
That is what it is. And honestly, Kristen Neff says that compassion relies on our ability to tap into shared humanity. And you and I have talked about this before, that the more we feel heard in our stories, the safer we feel, even if nobody is sharing our stories. So my siblings don't have to also be gay, but if my siblings can recognize that I feel isolated and alone for my difference in any way, shape, or form, then I feel seen and heard. They don't have to be gay. Parents don't have to leave their religion. But if we can't set aside those big right, wrong, rigid belief systems enough to tap into shared humanity, we will constantly be pushing this uncertainty. And like I said, it can take families down, and it can create a trauma response that is as significant as a major life event. Like, you can have so many of these teeny little microaggressions, so many of these teeny little stacked up arguments and conflict that you can get to the end of a 2-year period and we have people who are diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder from uncertainty conflicts.
Wow.
Yeah.
Ooh, my parenting radar is up.
Honestly, like I said, for me personally, I honestly believe this is going to be one of the biggest challenges I personally think that the people who are going to feel it the most are women who are mothers between the ages of like 35 and 55, because exactly what you said, some of the things that we were just literally repeating from our own childhoods without really even thinking about it, we spewed for those first few years. And now we know enough about those things that it's considered abuse. And so, like, for me personally, I feel like I am constantly in this place of curiosity going, wow, why does my child feel that way? Where did they come up with? Where did that belief begin for them? And how much of that was my doing? How can I not only go back and say, hey, I don't believe that anymore? And as a matter of fact, I'm really actually willing to explore this belief system with you, because I honestly don't understand it myself. Like, my kids and I have this conversation all the time where I will ask them, how did you reframe that belief? Because I can't seem to unwind from that. And my kids have been wonderful in helping me to be able to unwind some of those beliefs that I still can't really unwind myself.
What a cool conversation to be able to have with your kids, though. I mean, really, like, how to be able to learn from them as well. And what do they bring from their experience and their background and their friends and their social situations that help them work through things that sometimes when we get stuck in our routines or stuck in our mindset, like that they can help us break out of that. I think that's really cool.
It has been one of my biggest blessings, and it's probably still one of the things that causes or creates in me my biggest sadnesses too. So it's that.
I was going to say there's the mom part in me right now that's like, I'm causing them all the traumas. There's nothing I can do that doesn't cause trauma. But I do think having these conversations and just being educated about the effects that how we work with our children, that, not being the authoritarian parent is not being the weak parent.
Yeah.
It's a more compassionate way of parenting. It isn't really that, I think if you ask any parent, what do you want for your child? The default answer for so many parents is, I want my child to be happy. Okay, well, how do we get there?
And that's such a wrong answer, because nobody gets to define happiness.
Sure. Yeah.
I want my kids to be happy.
But that's the thing we parrot.
Yeah, it is. It is. But one of the things I kind of do want to say, so Gabor Mate's, I always say his name wrong, Gabor Mate, he says trauma originates from the Greek word for wound. And he says it's not what happens to you, it's what happens inside of you as a result of what happens to you. So it's not the blow on the head, but it's the concussion that you get. And I have been thinking about this a lot lately, because I have my advisor just fell, and she took a really bad fall. She was doing some gardening, and it happened in early April, and she has a concussion. And for the first 3 weeks, they were just watching her. She couldn't get on screen. She couldn't use email. She couldn't use her phone. And it was so significant that now she is not allowed to have lights on. So anything fake, she can't open up the windows. She has to be on a timer how long she can sit up, how long she can lay down. She's not allowed to walk around and do a lot. She can't drive. She still can't be on screen. The wound to her head is gone. The concussion, the damage to her brain, the injury to her brain is still extremely significant. And I think I love that definition from Mate, because we might have some kiddos who can go to church every single solitary Sunday. Well, I'm going to use this one because I have a friend that was like this. Every single Sunday they could hear, you're not supposed to play sports on Sunday. You're not supposed to watch rated R movies. And for one person, they can hear that and they can, in their mind, compartmentalize and say, that's your standard, not mine. But I went to church every Sunday and heard, don't watch rated R movies and don't play sports on Sundays. And I processed that even if I touched a basketball on Sundays, I was a sinner. The wound to me from being in church every Sunday and hearing how bad I was big, where somebody else's may have been small. So again, going to these uncertainties, we don't know how those microaggressions are landing deep within the heart. But if your child is asking you or talking to you about a situation, there's a good chance that they've already, I think I've shared this with you before, by the time we actually tell somebody that we're struggling, we've internally been struggling on average for 2 years. So by the time our kiddo comes to us and says, I don't feel comfortable going to church, I want to paint my nails, whatever it is, they've already been fighting that internal battle of what will happen if I say this? Will I still belong? Will you still love me? Am I going to be good enough? Am I going to be protected? Am I safe? So kind of just leaving that there too, that by the time our kiddos actually come to us and talk to us, your book shows it, like how many years fight it.
Little more than 2. There was
yeah.
Yeah. Oh, goodness.
So what do you think?
I think this was a great discussion. I love the fact that you have identified this type of trauma, because I don't know that a lot of people, myself included, had language around it. It was just like, this is what's happening in my life. And it's it's not the blow to the head. It was no significant thing. It was just this constant feeling of unease and just constantly not feeling good and feeling off kilter. And yeah. I saw the toll that took on me physically, mentally, emotionally. And yeah, I'm glad we have more language for it and that we had this conversation.
Yeah, well, I'm glad we did too. I told you it's been weighing heavy on my mind for a couple of months. And the more that I unpack my own book and the more that I unpack my own story and the more that I work with my clients, I just cannot tell you how much I explain this to my clients.
Yep. Fabulous. Well, again, I just want to remind those of you listening that if you do have questions or you want to share your own experience, or if there's a part of today's episode or any other episode that you'd like us to dive in even deeper on, you can email us at lifeandloveintheq@gmail.com or reach out to us on social media or however, whatever, all the things, because we do love to hear from you and would love to know what resonates, what your experience has been, and where we need to take the conversation from here.
Yeah. All right, everybody, have a great week. And we will be back next week with triangulation.
I also don't know what that is.
It's a good one.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Hey, everyone. It's Treisha. In today's episode, Jill and I talked about uncertainty, specifically how uncertainty within our family and community system can breed a very unique form of complex or secondary trauma. Although Jill and I had a great conversation, and I'm so grateful that we were able to open up this dialogue, it's such an important conversation that we were really only able to scratch the surface of it. So with that, I am so excited to invite you to a workshop that I am hosting on Sunday, June 25th at 6 p.m. Central Time. You can get more information on my website at www.trishapeterson.com. And you can register on the website, get more information, and even I'm going to invite you to post some of your own personal questions. Although there will be a recording, I am hoping to have as many of you there live as possible, because although I will offer you some ideas and I will explain this concept in a little bit more detail, what I'm really most excited to be able to do is to answer your questions. Of all of the conversations that I have with my friends, with my family, and with my clients, I would say this concept of uncertainty as a form of complex trauma is one of the top 3 things that I talk about the most. So very often when our families are going through a beliefs change or a foundational tradition change, or just even how are we going to be in these new roles or these new life experiences, it can just really breed so much chaos in our hearts that we don't really know how to go from where we once were to where we want to be. And as we stumble, although it's very normal to stumble, a lot of times as we stumble, we actually breed a lot more of that uncertainty and a lot more conflict. So this workshop is going to really be all about giving you some tools and some resources, some very actionable conversation starters to have some of the difficult conversations that sometimes we need to have in our homes. So again, I'm just really excited to invite you. I hope that you'll sign up, and I really hope that you'll give me some of your questions so that we can not just talk about the science, but just like everything that Jill and I talk about, we can talk about the science mingled with stories, because that's where the magic happens. At least that's my humble opinion. That's where the magic happens. Again, you can find more information on the workshop at www.trishapeterson.com. And it's Sunday, June 25th at 6 p.m. Central Time. There will be a recording, but I hope to see you there live. Have a great day, everyone. Bye.
Thank you for listening to Life and Love in the Q. If you enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to like, subscribe, and share. And if you have questions, contact us at lifeandloveintheq@gmail.com. Until next time, Q Crew.